home.
Yeah.
All set, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to the March 28th and final meeting of the Committee to Review and Assess Zoning and Review the Town's Use of Regulatory Agreements. Start by reading the Mass General Law statement. This meeting is being recorded and will be rebroadcast on the Town of Barnstable's Government Access Channel. In accordance with Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 38, Section 20, the chair must inquire whether anyone else is recording this meeting, and if so, to make their presence known. Seeing none, this meeting will be replayed via Xfinity Channel 8. It's available on Xfinity Channel 8 and High Definition Channel 1072. May also be accessed via the Government Access Channel live video on demand archives on the Town of Barnstable's website. We'll go ahead and Seth Etienne has joined us, but we'll ask Cynthia to take roll call. Item A.
Committee members: Catherine Ledeck.
Here.
Seth Etienne.
Here.
Ken Alsman.
Here.
Councilor Jeffrey Mendez. Councilor John Crow.
Here.
Councilor Matthew Levesque. Councilor Kristen Turkelson.
Here.
Councilor Charlie Bloom.
Here.
And Chair of Committee Bob Schulte.
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you. Read the purpose of our committee, which is to work with the town's planning and development staff to review and reassess recently adopted zoning changes, review the town's use of regulatory agreements, and make recommendations to the council. Just a quick intro. As this is our last meeting, I want to thank all of the committee members and the members of the public joining us today. I want to acknowledge and particularly thank the members of the public who over the last 9 months have appeared before us, written to the committee, called or spoken directly with the various committee members. One of the committee's objectives was to make this process as transparent as possible and solicit the views, opinions, and personal experiences of the public on the very important topics of zoning in our community. It's no secret that for quite some time, many residents of Barnstable have felt their concerns on many of the topics and issues we discussed have gone unheard or unacknowledged by the town leadership and town management. I'm sure not everyone will agree with the recommendations the committee makes to the council. However, I hope everyone will agree that we conducted our work in a transparent manner, gave everyone an opportunity to share their voice, and did our very best to at least identify and elevate the key areas of concern for actions by the town council. With that, we'll move to public comment. Do we have anyone present who would like to speak? Identify yourself and your village.
Maybe make one last provocative statement, if you don't mind.
Provocative.
My name's Eric Schwab, I live in Hyannis, and I would like to reiterate what Bob said and thank all of you for your hard work. It's been, I think, an exceptional committee, and I felt at all times that I was at least being heard, and that was very much appreciated. I'd especially like to thank Ken for his red line comments on the West Main Street zoning changes. He dropped them off at my house yesterday. It was very generous, and I thought they were excellent. They're just excellent. I'd like to also acknowledge Felicia Penn, who gave me a red line on the commercial zoning amendments, and I personally think that if you can get something past Felicia, that's pretty good. And it's ready to go. And so I would encourage you to make a strong statement about the need for updates to how commercial vehicle parking is handled in our neighborhoods. And then finally, I just wanted to let you know that I have completed somewhat belatedly updates to the home occupation amendment, and I sent that to Robin Anderson for comment. She is, without question, the most authoritative person in town as far as zoning in town. That most of us who've had zoning problems have probably worked with her at one time or another. And she was expressly prohibited by her manager from commenting on my draft. I just want to make that noted because I'm about to make a statement, which I'd like you to write down correctly, so I'm going to get in trouble.
It's on tape, so.
Okay, good. I think that Town Manager Mark Ells, Town Attorney Karen Nober, and Building Commissioner Brian Florence have intentionally and steadfastly interfered in citizen efforts to address zoning concerns in the neighborhoods. I've been working for 6 years in my neighborhood trying to get some basic zoning done. We got tired of waiting for enforcement, so we started actually writing the code, and then we just met with a whole nother level of resistance. So, clearly the citizens, I should hope that you agree, that the citizens of Hyannis who have stepped forward have all uniformly stated that they expect zoning changes, first and foremost, in their neighborhoods to preserve the quality of life in their neighborhoods, and we're not getting cooperation from town administration. So I'm very hopeful that you folks can nudge them, as you say, and politely, send them down the path and get us some really very reasonable zoning changes that will substantially increase the quality of life in the neighborhoods, especially in Hyannis. So I know there are zoning problems everywhere, but they seem to be concentrated in Hyannis. And they're fairly minor changes in language that can address these problems very quickly. We don't need a massive task force. We don't have to try to solve all the world's zoning problems. We should focus on that zoning, like downtown, that can be addressed relatively easily. So I think the work you guys did downtown was absolutely fabulous. I wish you all the luck before the council. And I hope that you put in a good word for the neighborhoods as well. We appreciate anything you can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone on Zoom?
There is nobody on Zoom.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Schwab.
Thank you.
Just with that, we'll go ahead and close the live public comment and remind the public that all of the committee's meetings are available on the video on demand for future viewing if they're interested. We'll move to item C, which is written correspondence from the public. I think we all received a copy of an email Cynthia forwarded that was from Mr. Chris Kuhn. Mr. Kuhn shared his concerns about the potential for significant traffic problems on East Main Street as a result of the project going in at the site of the old Cascade Motel, as well as his concerns about parking and traffic that will result from all the proposed development in the downtown district. Other than that, we did not receive any other written public comment. So we will move to item D, which is committee review of the final draft, which you have a copy. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I apologize.
That's okay.
By all means.
I am curious, and Jim, maybe you could speak to this, just because I don't know the process. If town councilors were so moved to want to update the commercial parking regulations, what is the current process in place that kind of needs to take place? If you could educate me as a town council member and just residents at large, what would that look like in order for that to come to fruition? What needs to be done?
So to amend the commercial parking ordinance as it stands today?
Yeah.
Much like any other ordinance modification or zoning change, Kate Conley's here, I know, that could maybe speak to it in terms of general ordinance, but typically first read so before it gets to first read at town council, the councilors that have raised concern would bring that to leadership. Leadership would speak of that concern to the manager. The manager would bring in the applicable departments to help, manage or update whatever amendment that being sought. So very likely in this case, if we're talking about amending commercial parking ordinance, legal would be involved, planning would likely be involved, any other enforcement arms that probably have a hand in it would be involved. And we would try and bring forward a ordinance, potentially working with those counselors that have interest, and working through developing out an ordinance that we believe would achieve the goals that have been asked to be met, and then we would put it forward. It would be a first read from the council. If there's any aspects of land use, I believe it does go, or whether it is required or if it's recommended to go to the planning board, Okay, for a general ordinance, I don't know if it's required to go to the planning board?
Not for, through you, Mr. Chair, the previous speaker, not for a general ordinance, but a zoning ordinance does require a planning board report to town council. And it doesn't have to be a long written report. It can simply be planning board recommends or planning board does not recommend.
And for any ordinance that may have land use implications, even though it's not a zoning ordinance, it could be referred to the planning board for their recommendation, or is that, or would that not be recommended from legal?
Not typically, if it's got nothing to do with land use, it typically would not be sent to the planning board.
Okay. So first read from council, we could work on it from there with the council. Ultimately, it goes to a second read at council where that's a public hearing. And then you as the councilors would vote on that.
Okay. And as a different process, or is the process different for a zoning change, say that, again, town councilors felt that the neighborhood district on West Main Street was something we wanted to bring forward, what is the process? What process needs to be done for that to come?
Yep, very similar. So again, if councilor or a party wish to amend zoning, again, it would be brought to leadership to manager manages all of the departments. So they would refer it, very likely for zoning, it would start back to the planning department. We would bring in legal's assistance on the matter, very likely. And again, any applicable departments that it touches. I have some suggestions about how we might be able to manage that process a little bit better in the early stages, especially since I'm thinking about what our next steps from after this memo is brought to council, and if the council wished to, begin working on many of these, I'm beginning to think about what we could do or work with the council to manage that early process before it gets to council's first read.
Thank you, appreciate that.
And actually, Mr. Schwab has left, but maybe he'll watch the video. I guess I will make one additional comment. He referenced, the home occupation wording. He provided, as you know, we all received copies of some of the recommendations he had, detailed sample ordinances. The subcommittee discussed whether those items should be included as part of our memo, but we felt that, to select certain things from some members of the public and include them and not others, would not have been appropriate. So we know that he has shared those with counselors and other people, as he mentioned, to the folks over in the planning or enforcement group. So we did not include those copies. We made a choice decision that it would not have been appropriate. The only thing that we are including in the appendices, as you've seen, are items that the actual committee members themselves presented to the committee and that were discussed. So I think, as you know, Eric is quite tenacious, and he'll make sure that the council and the right people see those, and I know he's already provided copies, but just wanted to comment on that.
So just following up on that, and I'm not pointing at anybody in particular, but let's just say a resident out there has an interested item where they think an improvement to the zoning ordinance could occur. What would they do? Essentially approach their counselor, right? And then that counselor would collaborate with others and potentially bring it forward with the remaining process that you just described, right?
You have multiple options. So yes, if it's something that is not a finished product, and a lot of residents might not speak the zoning. It can
Language,
be
right.
zoning language. So if it's a topic of interest, reach out to your counselors, and it can follow that process, and we can have a working group. A lot of times, whenever there's an issue, we put together some working group of different parties to make a more refined product that can then go through the process. Alternatively, if it's something that you feel strongly about and you do have more of a finished product, maybe you hired a land use attorney, whatever it might be, 10 registered voters can petition the town to move forward with it. We are currently working through one right now with the recreational marijuana that was petitioned by 10 registered voters. And so typically though, most communities, they like to be able to work through the nuances of our local zoning code and draft something that fits in holistically. And petitions tend not to do that. So yes, if any resident had a real specific issue that they're looking to, you know, move forward with zoning, I would definitely start with your counselors, obviously, but, or come talk to the planning department. We are happy to be that conduit between. But yeah, that's where we would start.
Thanks very much. I'm just thinking that we couldn't possibly cover everything in the zoning ordinance. It's just not possible. I'm sure there's, you know, a dozen little tweaks here and there that could be, you know, done to improve it. I just want those who are listening or anybody who would listen after the fact to understand that they would be heard if they brought it forward, yeah.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Yeah, I still go back, I was surprised when the zoning enforcement was not considered part of, or even for discussion, frankly, of our charge. Of all the things that have been discussed here, the most clear thing to me is the harm that is being done to residential neighborhoods by allowing uses that would not even be allowed in some industrial areas to just flourish in the neighborhoods. And it's sort of the broken window thing. I mean, that's just the start, because what it does to the sort of the psyche of the neighborhood and the feeling about the neighborhood and the real estate look at the neighborhood, all those sorts of things seem to me to be very easy to address. They will be disruptive to some people who are illegally. I think if I read the existing ordinances for home occupation law, it's clear that they're not legal. So something really needs to be done. I don't know who does it. Maybe it's this new group that the city manager is setting up, but I think it's vitally important, because the zoning looks at a private piece of land and says what you can and can't do on it. It is not, but the neighborhood consists of that piece of land, all the other pieces of land that are somewhat similar to it, to create an enclave of, not an enclave, but a neighborhood. And it extends out into the street where people are parking all over the place, if that's happens in a particular neighborhood. It just seems to me that, for instance, reference was made to we can't do anything because it's a private street. I think I have that right. And to me, if it's a private street, the property, in a sense, goes to the center of the street. So whatever that property is zoned, sort of the street, in a sense, is part of that same zoning. And in clarifying just that might be a very simple thing to do. So off my high horse here, and I think it's probably one of the most important things that I've gotten out of this committee is that that's an area that can and should be addressed fairly quickly.
I would just follow up and say I agree with you, Ken. Obviously, you know, we were cautioned by Attorney Connolly, and we chose to abide by the recommendations, but I think we worded fairly strongly in the memo that we think this is a very important issue and stress that it's important that the council act on this. So try to make sure that we did not go awry of the legal department's recommendations, but I agree with you wholeheartedly that it's something that the town needs to address and immediately. So thanks for your comments. So, John?
I will also chime in on the same subject. I was very surprised it isn't part of our charter here, what we're held for this particular committee. We're talking about zoning, and zoning includes enforcement as far as I'm concerned. But I will say that I'm looking forward to Assistant Manager Clyburn's group coming to us in a fairly quick manner to when they've decided who's responsible for what type of zoning and where and that kind of stuff. So I think I will be talking to him in the near future about how he's coming with that, and so we can get started. I think that is obviously, I think one of the elephant in the room here, that and Eric Schwab seems to think that we're not doing any enforcement and haven't done for years, and I happen to sort of believe that, and so I think we're going to turn the page on that. So I appreciate any other people who are interested in that to stay involved.
I'd like to quickly say too that I support what Ken said.
Thank you, Charlie. Strips?
My last word on this, I agree with what Ken said as well, and I think, you know, I don't have children, but I can imagine if you raise your kids with no rules and no boundaries and they become unruly, that as you try to reel them back, it can be very painful for those involved. So I think, you know, there is gonna be a period of time where people are gonna be really angry at the fact that, well, you've allowed me to do this and do that, and we're gonna have to claw back the boundaries of what we allow, of what we shouldn't have been allowing. But I think, like you said, I think that the benefit will be the quality of life of the people that are living within the rules and cleaning up our neighborhoods for their vitality, because you know, the sprawl of what we allow, if we don't have some boundaries, I think it can just kind of keep getting bigger and bigger, and maybe not to the benefit of those who are trying to keep their life and, you know, maintain their homes and those kinds of things, so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll say,
Beth, go ahead.
yeah, I disagree. It's one, it's a scatter plot of things. So one, I'd question what is the cause of the broken windows that you like referenced, the critical issue of, at least not with zoning, but with the neighborhoods that you see?
What is the cause of it?
Yeah.
The cause of it is that people are operating industrial uses in a residential neighborhood. And I hate to use the word residential as well. It's the neighborhood. In other words, what does a neighborhood feel like? How do people look at it? How do the residents look at it? How does the community look at it? And you can drive into almost any neighborhood and sort of get a sense that it is a great place, it's a bad place, it's got problems, it's getting better, it's getting worse. And that's sort of my understanding of what planning is about, is how do you create a sense where people really want to maintain the property, want to enjoy it, not be afraid of things that are happening around them. Some of the testimony they got about people are afraid to even tell people about it because they've been threatened by the people who are creating these issues. I have great empathy for the need, and it's the secondary part of this, which is the need to make sure that there is a place or places where people who operate these businesses can satisfactorily find a location. It will likely mean they have to change the way they're doing business. I hark back to a personal experience where I had a family down the street from where I lived in back in California who bought the property, and all of a sudden there were, it was a landscaping business. And they'd start out at 6 in the morning and testing all their equipment and getting things going, and there'd be 3 or 4 trucks, and they'd leave them there during the day. It was very uncomfortable. And it was not something that I thought was appropriate to the neighborhood. I have to admit, I couldn't do anything about it back there because I was on the staff. But it was, I had discussions with the property owner, and Mr. Guzman was not happy with me, so. But it isn't I don't think it's up to the neighbors to try to correct the problem when they have in the neighborhood on something like that. It can become very difficult. So.
Seth, can I just ask you, I think the issue here is whether we feel zoning enforcement should be improved, or when you say you oppose the idea of better zoning enforcement? Or what is it you oppose?
I don't oppose that. I oppose at the basic premise of why you have placed zoning enforcement so high. And when I say the premise, I mean what you feel as if what the critical issue is that zoning enforcement would solve. And at least in this case, I'm willing to support zoning enforcement as long as it doesn't create further secondary and tertiary consequences. So if we were to enforce commercial vehicles in residential neighborhoods and be very strict about this is a residential neighborhood, you do not operate a business from your home. Okay, let's do that. But then we do need to consider that, okay, we've just taken away a stream of income, maybe someone's livelihood away. And we are putting, I guess, a bay for commercial vehicles on the back burner, putting it somewhere else in an industrial zoned area. But while that lag effect happens, what does that person do who has now lost his income? And what are the consequences, not just to him, but the people that he lives with and the people in his neighborhood and his community? Like, what are the ripple effects from that? And this is not just going to be for one vehicle, but since this is a very commonly talked about issue and problem in the town, I'm going to assume that this, if you see one truck, there's probably maybe 5, 10, dozens out there more. And if we are going to be strict in enforcing that, then we need to be very sensitive to the consequences that has.
John?
The difference is that we have ordinances against this already. Okay, so they're basically breaking the law by doing what they're doing in residential neighborhoods. The tertiary effects of that are taken on by somebody who's actually breaking the law. Okay, the tertiary effects are for the neighbors that have to deal with this, and you can't run a business in a residential neighborhood. It's just simply not part of the zoning. Okay, and that's for a good reason. Otherwise, we'd have total chaos. You'd have a gas station next to a house, next to a repair shop, next to a windmill. That's what zoning's all about. Okay, and so you're worried about the tertiary effects to somebody who's actually doing the wrong thing. I don't care about what those tertiary effects to that person, because they are doing the wrong thing. Okay, it's already in zoning, you cannot do that. So therefore, I think the more important thing is to worry about what the neighbors have to deal with, somebody who's breaking the law. So it's there plain and simple, and people ignore it, and then our town allows them to ignore it. And they've done so for years, and that's why we're asking that the town actually enforce what's happening. Just enforce the laws that are on the books.
I can understand that. I think pragmatically, it's not necessary to inject morality into it, whether or not it's right or wrong, whether or not these ordinances are already on the books, people are breaking them, therefore they deserve their consequences. And since it is a business, there is a seller and a buyer. We're only going after people who are selling their services, but not necessarily buying their services. They essentially are just not a factor in this whatsoever. And my biggest question throughout all this I've always wondered about is, why is there such a market for landscapers on Cape?
Well,
But it's not just landscapers. I don't know if you're aware, like over in La France Ad, they actually had a business who they basically dumped their used oil into a drain, and that cost the town, I think, upwards of $150,000 on a weekend to emergently call in services to keep that water out of our water stream. That was just somebody who decided to dump their motor oil in a residential neighborhood from their business that they were running into a drain.
Yeah.
So it's not just landscapers, it's junk dealers, you probably don't know the case that the town tried to take to court that was not successful, but he literally had like a carnival units in his yard, front yard, side yard, backyard. He had a carnival business ready to go in his property. So it's not just landscapers, it's people running businesses. And as far as morality, what you're asking the people who are following the rules is to basically say morally, I'd like to allow this guy to run his business so that morally it's better that he can still provide for his family. I mean, your argument is on some level still a moral argument.
I'm just gonna jump in here. I think we're getting into beyond the scope of, the actual activities. I think if I understand correctly, I think we can all agree that, better enforcement of the existing laws is something we support. We can debate what those laws may be or someone else, but that's not the purview of this committee. So
Yeah, enforcement is important. I'm just more so arguing the order and priority in which you should have that enforcement.
Okay, well, we'll get to that when we go through the memo here. I wanted to get people's input on the priorities, so we can talk about that, so. Okay, so if we could move on to item D, which is a review of the draft. Again, based on all the comments that people sent in, the subcommittee has met twice. I actually spoke with Jim, one meeting since the initial comments as well, and have tried to reflect all those comments within the red line version that Cynthia put together here for us. I don't know whether we need to go through and review line, page by page. I think the significant things that were added since the last version, which everybody reviewed, was the executive summary and the priority ranking. I did my best attempt based on the conversations we've had, discussions with the subcommittee, so I wanted to go through that. Then there was the discussions regarding short-term rental regulations or thoughts on that, and by right zoning, which I added after Jim's presentation at our last meeting. For the most part, the other items reflected the comments that I received from the committee members and through the subcommittee. So with that, there were a few items that came up during the course of the conversations that I wanted to get Jim's input on. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about that. Unless anybody has any specific comments first, we can maybe go through those with Jim. And then Kate also had some comments that she wanted to insert. I think, Kate, we didn't get the email. Cynthia, we don't have a copy of that. I think people might have it on their email, so it might be helpful for you to explain that to us when we get to that, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah, I think she said a separate, is that? Okay, maybe we do have that, okay.
It's a one page.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Jim, if we could take a look at, if you have a copy there, I think one of the things we talked about, it came up in the court conversations, was on page 11. And it was about the suggestions you had. I'm just looking at this. I don't think this is the most recent. It is. Okay. About the parking dimensions. One of the questions there came up as to, what was the source of those? Do we think those make sense based, maybe you can shed some light on that. Want to make sure people are comfortable in making the recommendations that we have in there for the size and dimensions.
Yep, yeah, so the size of these come from both our, the minimum standards in much of our local code, but also within, I can send you a source link, I believe it's the AASHTO standards, the traffic standards for parking management. And 9x18 is typically the minimum standard. You could certainly make it bigger, but we talked about it at one point, leaving the 9x18 as that ability to put a standard vehicle in, and then you could certainly, any developer or anybody planning a development could go further. I mean, there are many parking spaces, your standard Walmarts and the world have the 10x20 spaces very likely in most instances, which are slightly larger spaces. But again, thinking through, this is the standard for downtown Hyannis. Do we want to plan for the very biggest vehicle, meaning that pavement year round will be for the very biggest vehicle, or do we want to offer those minimum standards for your typical parking space? And so that's why I offered the 9x18. It's your standard vehicle parking space.
And Jim, is 307 Main, those spaces are 9x18?
No, oh, not all of them. No, they have a lot of compact parking spaces, and that was the impetus.
What's the size of a compact parking space then?
I don't recall offhand. I want to say it's smaller than this.
Like
It's
8x17 or something?
yeah. It might even go down to 7 feet in length.
Well, this is bigger than that. So.
Okay. So are people comfortable with that recommendation then? I am.
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of a.
I mean, it's a minimum, it's a
Yeah,
minimum.
it's a minimum, yeah.
So if they wanted to go bigger to accommodate somebody's truck, they could do that.
Okay. Page 13. And this is what, I talked to Jim and we had a conversation and I was just trying to get it clear in my mind. And Jim, we talked about this. I don't know if you had a chance to do anything in terms of, I asked Jim, I think the current standard is, under the current zoning is up to 4 stories. The old zoning was up to 3 stories, right, Jim?
Right.
And what we have been saying that it would be 3 stories with the opportunity to go to 3.5 if the top floor is activated for residents, commercial use, restaurant, etc. And I asked him if he could just clarify for us again the 3 scenarios. I want to make sure what we're recommending. I view the 3 with a half story as kind of a compromise, but I wanted to make sure we understand, what that looked like, each of those scenarios, so that we're making the recommendation that makes the most sense, or the intent of the committee, so.
May I have sharing? So, yeah, I didn't have time to put modeling up, but what I do have is some examples of both existing and proposed developments to give you an understanding of the varied heights between 2 to 4. There we go. Second. There we go. All right, so varied heights of buildings in Hyannis that exist today or proposed. Sorry, you're right. Starting with 2, I didn't bother with the 1 story. I think we all know the 1 story, but this is your run-of-the-mill, mid-century development that is 2 stories. And the key is, if you take a look to the very edge of the right, where in between the peak there, in between the gable, there is no habitable space. There's no proof of windows, and the habitable space is really the key here when we're talking about creating a half story or not creating a half story. You can have a gable roof and it still be 2 stories. The transition from 2 to 2.5 would mean that there is going to be habitable space, likely a loft or something, which means that this facade, the separation between essentially the gutter line and that window, is likely to be larger. So that second story, essentially what we see from the outside, that second story is going to be slightly larger because you're creating headspace for folks on the half story there. So this is your standard, it's kind of small tight box, and that's your 2-story structure. And this is what we have proposed nowadays. This is proposed in a couple different locations. Actually, your standard 2-story duplex. This is a duplex, just happened to be a duplex, but we could take 1 door off and it would be basically the same structure we saw. And while you'll see a vent in that gable, that's a vent for for proper air circulation, but it's not habitable space. It could be very likely, attic space or something like that. You have your drop ceiling and all that, and that's still 2 stories. Whereas now we slide into 2.5 stories. And so this is a more creative approach where you have 2, but you see the indication, the clues on the left side there. We now have a window, and you notice how the roof is a lot taller than we have there. So the pitch is a lot different. And there's dormers coming out of it. So we're starting to see a little bit of the indication of that half story above the 2. So that's the difference between 2 and 2.5 there. Same thing here. We have 2.5 stories now, where we're using this. This is getting much taller. You're seeing originally from, if you remember that first one there, the 2-story, that gutter line is probably right here. Whereas now we're creating probably a good 4 or 5 feet there. So it's giving you that space for livable space there. And this is one that we actually, very similar. This is one proposed off of Yarmouth Road. It's a multifamily. But it's making it look like a 2-story, but then it has that taller half story that allows for living space, but it's not going to be all the way through. So very likely on the interior, what you're going to find is that wall is somewhere here and right here. A lot of times they use it for storage and stuff like that there, but you're really only working with maybe 2/3 of that space. Now we move to 3 stories. So this is actually right next door to this guy here. So this is the 3-story. You can see it in the background in the yellowish hue. So this is 3 stories. It's in terms of overall height, it's not that much taller. Though I will say it's a little deceiving. The topography slopes a little down as you go towards that rear structure. But this is 3 stories. So now we have a full height for that 3rd story. And again, we're seeing the repetitive nature where we have gable, but there's no window or anything like that. So there's no habitable space there. So you can still have a 3-story with a gable roof, and that's still just 3 stories. And this is a design that was proposed, didn't move forward, but this is what was proposed. This is something that was proposed on Main Street for 3 stories there. And so again, they got the different roof lines, but it's just simply 3 stories. This is another 3-story. This is right behind us on the harbor. Again, just 3 stories, despite the fact that you got a real steep pitch there, but that in turn, you see the evidence of, or lack of evidence of windows or anything like that, which would indicate internally you likely got a vaulted ceiling or something like that.
Can I ask you, Jim, on a 3-story, is there an ultimate height for the whole building, including the gable as well?
Yep.
What is that restriction?
So it's a formula. So in our zoning, you have no more than 18 feet on the first floor. So the first floor, no more than 18 feet. Otherwise, we begin to call it a 2-story or second story. But typically, what you're going to see is around 14 feet or so, and then it reduces above. Remember, we're talking about in downtown Hyannis, so it reduces above because everything above that is going to be residential. So I believe it's no more than 16 feet. I want to say on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Technically, but again, you're going to see much closer to 10, 12 feet for those. And then we have a limit on pitch. And so really, this is actually a really good example. So we have each floor has that maximum height, and then the overall height of the roof has a maximum pitch that it can create. So it's going to be around that steepness is the maximum pitch. And it's spelled out in the zoning. So all those together, and when we did the formula for a 4-story, it was in the 60s as your maximum. If everyone built it out to the max you could possibly do, it would be in the high 60s for max roof line, tip of roof line there.
And just curious, so by comparison, for just a 3-story, what would that height be, and what would it be for 3.5? If you can estimate.
Well, again, it would depend on the ultimate pitch of the roof. So it's not as, so for maximum, I guess if you're asking about maximum and you're just taking out that one floor, we're talking a maximum of 16 feet that you would be pulling out. Right, so you don't have to, I guess.
60 less 16?
Right, yeah, and that's the maximum, but you're more than likely, we're talking closer to like a 10 to 12 foot, though, that we're talking about as a height difference. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this is another one that was proposed that is very similar, so it's 3 stories, and you see in the gables there, those are vents. So, it's on the tops, they're trying to offer higher ceilings. But there isn't evidence of habitable space. So we're really only talking 3 stories. We move along to, this is a commercial one, but it's one of our few examples of 4 stories. It's right on the harbor there. And so this is 4 stories. And again, you see a little gable up there with a vent, but this is actually a faux gable. That's to hide the mechanicals back there. So there's no habitable space, it's just 4 stories. And this same thing, this is the green, which you guys are familiar with, 4 stories, active rooftop. Actually on the left side there, I included it just because so you can see the difference of 4 stories versus what you could consider as 5 stories if we're talking about the height, just overall heights, but that's an elevator shaft, that's not a story. that on the left side, and this was done through a reg agreement, and they considered that and spelled it out that the elevator shaft could go to that height. But so that's a typical 4-story. This is where the cascade is going. Again, this is, see the difference here between excuse me, let's go back here. 3 stories with the gable, so no evidence of habitable space. And if you recall, actually, let me go back to here, where we're talking about windows adding into that half story. So just looking at if you're standing up and taking up the full space, you're not taking up the full floor. It's just half of that, and there's no like door, for instance, it's just windows. Whereas here, we're adding an entirety of a floor here when it's set back. So this, with the new code, obviously you can go 3 with a setback of the 4th floor. Here you see indication, and maybe you can't quite tell because they got the railings in front of it, but this is actually a full story with doors, sliders coming out from that area. So this would be a full 4th floor at that location.
So, freeze on that, so I know, maybe you can show us, what would that look like if it was the 3 with a half story?
Right.
Rather than.
Yeah, I don't have any good examples of that one. And the reason why is because you're gonna be lowering this gable area. So if we're talking about, in the proposal, we talk about activating that rooftop essentially, and having set back the half story. What we would have challenges with is you're essentially creating 2 roof lines. So you're creating a flat roof, you're building a flat roof, stepping it back, and then you would be lowering this, so it would be more of like a window. So we would really be operating out of like dormers, very likely. And so it would be a very challenging architectural development. Maybe that's something we're interested in, though. It does spark a little bit more creativity. But you would have this lowered. We would likely be operating out of dormers as opposed to the full development. And it would be a bit of a challenge to functionally execute the half story where you could then access. It would very likely have something similar to this, where there's the separation of residential with dormers, and if we're gonna be activating for commercial purposes, probably a separate entrance point where they would utilize that space.
So the greenery, going back to that picture, is basically 4 stories.
4-story, yep.
And how is it that they got that rooftop on there and 4 stories?
It's a regulatory agreement.
No, I'm not, sorry, that's a bad question.
Yeah.
Is it, meaning architecturally,
It's a flat roof.
okay, even though there's those gables at the front, like these gables.
Yeah, that's faux. You can see
Okay.
it just
Because the
kind
one
of.
right there has windows, that's faux too?
I believe. Well, there might be some.
Well, couldn't theoretically
cathedral,
be living because
but-
it's already 4 stories.
Yeah,
That
if
would
you
be a
see here-
5-story building.
If you see here, it may go back slightly, and there might be some cathedral ceilings there, but ultimately right behind there.
Is
And
it
then
flat roof?
it's flat roof with all
Yeah.
the railings around it.
Okay, so it's 4 stories with a flat roof. So if we wanted to allow like rooftop access for residents, like at the greenery, because we want people to be able to have a place to like barbecue or sit outside or whatever, 3 stories.
Yes. So I
Like
don't,
any
Yep.
developer could say, I have a 3-story building and I want a flat roof and I'm gonna make it available to residents.
absolutely.
Can you just remind me on this particular project?
Yep.
There's no retail below, that's for, what is that for?
No, there is retail below.
Well, that's what it is?
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
It's
some of it, not all of it, and it's not required to be retail there, but they chose to put some retail in
okay,
it.
okay.
There is also lobby space for the buildings.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Jim, is there architecture speak, is there a section of this, or they're not that part yet?
There is. I don't have it in this presentation.
Okay.
I couldn't share it with you.
So we're looking at something that's 3.5 stories.
Here, this would be full. This is actually
Full 4 stories.
4 stories.
And the difference between the 4 and the 3.5 is habitable space, or do I got that part mixed up?
Exactly right. So the habitable space will create a half story. So with this, we're building up, and so we're taking the full availability of height for the ceilings, and we're going all the way across in both directions, and we're creating a full habitable apartment structures within. So for this one, for instance, is 4. It could have been 3.5 by dropping this down, creating dormers probably.
So it's just the gables that make it 4.
Well, the gables that allow for the height,
Yeah.
that makes it a full 4, yeah.
And under the 3 with a half story, that half would not be habitable, right? It would be for the amenities, if put a gym up there or put a restaurant.
So if,
way this is worded here?
as it's worded, I believe we say 3.5 stories if the rooftop is activated or something to that effect.
It's proposed to have active space such as a rooftop amenities for residents, active commercial space such as a restaurant, green roof, etc.
So-
as well.
So under that,
So
there would,
how I would read that today, and obviously this doesn't have to be final language, this is a
Yeah.
recommendation goes to council. That would read that language is that, let's just say part of this is there's a half story here and there's apartments there. I would say this rooftop needs to be activated. But the half story wouldn't necessarily have to be associated with that activation based on how that's written. We could tighten that up to make that if that's what you wanted to say. But I read that as you're allowing for 3.5 stories as long as the rooftop is activated. And so that rooftop being essentially kind of the urban open space, the rooftop area needs to be activated for, I think, commercial purposes or what have you.
I will ask for thoughts on how. I'm sorry, do you have any more, Jim?
Nope.
I'm sorry.
And I just have one other
Yep.
question. Can you go back to the cascade picture? We say that's 4 stories,
Mhm.
but in essence, the reason why that top floor doesn't go all the way to the edge, like these go all the way over,
Mhm.
the reason this doesn't go all the way, oops,
Oh,
all the way over there,
okay.
is that because of our design elements that make it have to
Exactly
be
right.
step back?
Yeah, exactly right.
So really, it almost looks like a 3/4 story because we've taken off the ends and set it back. So
That's right.
it's kind of
And,
like,
and when you're on the sidewalk, you won't see any of that. That was the intention. Yeah.
And I guess what made me want a little more clarity from Jim is in my conversations, I mean, my understanding of the intent of the committee, or the majority of the committee, is to bring down the heights a little bit, you know. Even, we're hearing from various sources that already some of the developers are concerned with the number of units that are being built. We're gonna have a, surplus before too long. So one of the ways to do that is to bring that down, as well as some of the concerns about the 4 stories all the way down Main Street. And I wanted to make sure we're in agreement that by going to the 3 with a half story is effective in accomplishing that recommendation if the council was to decide to move forward. So I guess the thought would be, I have all the wording here, I redlined it so you can see both ways. One would be to bring it back down to a maximum 3 stories. We could just reject the change there on page 13 that says, however, allowing for the 3.5 story if the rooftop. I just wanted to make sure that we think that that's effective in what we intended to make as a recommendation to the council.
I think I probably way back when we started this, didn't understand as I now understand it, having looked at that. And I guess in my mind, what I was thinking was that it would be nice to have 3 stories and allow usage of that above space above 3 stories. But what Jim is, I think what you're saying, Jim, is that
Usage as what? I'm sorry.
that it would be 3 stories. I think my intent was 3 stories and then encouraging people to use that upper deck to have access to the outdoors. And I don't think that the half story on top of 3 actually promotes that any more than a developer, if he wanted to put a rooftop deck on his 3-story building, could do that with 3 stories as is. I don't know that the half story necessarily it might discourage it, because then there's less space to actually have an open deck, and we have mechanicals and that stuff. So I mean, I'm more to the idea that I think 3 stories would be.
Now, I was of the same thought that I thought the half-story was gonna be activated for amenities as opposed to the half-story being used for residential as well, and then you have a deck on, a rooftop on that. So that was what I was thinking we were making with the recommendation. Any other thoughts?
Just real quick though,
Yeah.
so you could phrase it in such a way that requires, if you're gonna do half-story or what have you, that it is for commercial purposes only, if that's what if that was the intent. I couldn't tell you one way or the other whether someone's gonna take you up on that.
Yeah, I don't think that we should force commercial. I think if anything, we should say you should be providing rooftop amenities for your residents. I mean, that would be more, a place where you can go and sit outside and read a book, or you could have a barbecue with your friends or your family, or you could hang out at night and, look at the stars. That's more what my intent was, because, I mean, having been to the greenery, I mean, that rooftop is like, I think is a selling point to that property.
I mean, that would be my inclination, would be to modify the language to encourage the use of that half-story for that purposes. I agree, I
don't even think.
not inclined to go back and just say, go right back down to 3-story. I think we wanna encourage that use outdoors, but I think it should be, whether it's a commercial, a restaurant, or it's a patio for the residents, that's my thought, so. Others?
It just sounds to me like you don't need that half story in order to
I don't think you need the
activate-
half story.
activate on top of the 3rd floor. I don't think you need the half story.
I don't think so either.
If you have a smart architectural designer, it's not gonna be just a flat roof with railings on the ends, You'll have all these gables that might make it a little bit more interesting.
And any architect will be smart and clever enough to figure that out. It's the developer that will force their hand in doing so to be cheap and cut corners and be very simple.
Yeah.
Jim, is there something we could put in the language that would encourage outdoor access for residents? I guess that's really what I was thinking, is like, how can we give people who live in a more city-like atmosphere the access to the outside?
Yeah.
Because, we're losing green space by making our buildings literally up to like the sidewalk. So is there something we could put in there to kind of say the intention is, how we want our neighborhood to be is to have rooftop access?
Yeah, I think we could give that some consideration, so if that's a recommendation, it could certainly be something that, for the council to consider. We're seeking a rooftop activation, and whether that's through zoning or otherwise, we would request that as a consideration. Maybe we don't have to spell it out right here, right now, but that we could certainly give that some thought.
So would you both be suggesting then going to 3-story
Yeah.
and then include some wording that would encourage?
It just doesn't seem to me like you need that, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think you need that half story.
I actually think it makes it harder to make that rooftop access, because you have half of your space taken up with this other half story, and then you're trying to like shove some outdoor space around that, whereas if you just leave the top of the building to be creative for the architect, then hopefully they will see value in creating outdoor spaces for its residents.
Oh no, they'll find a way. I just find it the juxtaposition between we need to conserve space for the activation of the rooftop. At the same time, we're gonna have parking minimums that force the developer to sacrifice space for cars that we could have given for green space for the residents of that property.
We'll go around and poll. Seth, what would your vote to leave it at 3.5?
I would go up to
Go
4.
3? You would go to 4?
Yes.
Ken?
4 with rooftop access.
Okay. Ken?
If we go with language that says 3.5, what's to stop somebody from doing a 4-story 40B?
None of this would stop anything from a comprehensive permit being applied for.
Yeah.
Charlie, do you have any thoughts? We currently have the the 3 maximum with a half story, or capping it at 3, and then adding some language would work with Jim to encourage activation of the rooftop for amenities for the residents.
I'd like to give the builder 3.5. But I'm concerned that we just went through this thing at the corner of Ocean and Main Street with the old brick building there. What's to stop him from just doing a 40B? Nothing.
Financing.
Possibly, but there are ways out there to finance these things. Sometimes even to the point where the developer doesn't even have to spend a cent. So I'm concerned that we do these great works. We try to establish a really nice main street, and then somebody comes along, does a 40B, and just kind of spoils it for us.
But Charlie, the advantage of a 40B would be, at least if they're gonna build a four-story 40B, at least it would be 20 to 25% affordable versus a non-40B.
Yeah.
10% affordable. I mean, like, if you ask me which one I would support a 40B at 4 stories as opposed to a 4-story not 40B.
Yeah.
I mean,
except that I fear that 40B would look pretty bad. In that it would not be architecturally desirable.
but I think in the Hyannis Main Street district, right, Jim, it would have to go, a 40B would not even have to go through that level. They bypass even a historic district.
That's what's called the comprehensive permit. It means that it's comprehensively reviewed by the zoning board of appeals.
Even in a historic
So it
district.
skips that.
So Charlie, when you say that a 40B building on Main Street wouldn't look good or like architectural, do you mean like aesthetically, like material, color, form?
Well, like that nice design that fella did for the corner of Ocean and Main Street. I really liked the way the front of the building on Main Street looked. I didn't like the way the building on the side of Ocean Street looked. It looked too massive. And I think that a 40B, after a guy has spent 10 years or more trying to come up with a plan for this thing, that he spent a lot of money, and he's probably going to do a 40B and make it as inexpensive as possible. And I think that means that the nice architectural designs that might have gone into the one that he just showed us all, which was voted down, and I agree with the voting it down, but I don't know what to say about this situation, because I'm just concerned that we're doing all this good work, I think, and I'd like to see 3.5, but I think that until we get our stock up to 10%, anything can happen.
Okay. Ken, go back to Ken, thoughts?
I'm sort of, I could repeat what Charlie just said in respect. It's very, I'm still confused about 40B. I mean, could they say, hey, we want to put up 5 stories?
Yes.
So I don't even think it enters into our formulation of what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. The only other thought I had was that I don't know if you guys want to get into doing incentives for people, okay, we're going to create a plaza down on the ground level, and therefore I can go up higher on half of the building or something like that. I think it's, both in terms of timing and sort of expertise at the table, I don't know that we can, really recommend that. So 3.5 works for me. It worked last week and it still works for me, but I'm not totally I could be convinced to just go with the 3-story and then let the master over here figure out a way to get something better.
Okay, let me ask you, John.
Can you go back to that 4-story one for the Cascade, I think it is?
And I think, Jim, it might be helpful too, just in referring to the building that was proposed at Ocean and Main. Under the 3, when we have the 3 up to 3.5, what impact that would have had on that design? Would that have met the 3 with a half story, or they had to bring that down? The one that was turned down.
The one that was turned down, right, 1 second.
I'll let you answer John's question first, but just thinking about that.
Yeah.
How might that have impacted that design?
So it would have lowered, rather than, well, I believe the proposal before them right now is actually at 3.5, the most recent one. I honestly have to look back.
I was thinking it was 4 because of the back.
It's been a few weeks.
Yeah.
Was it ultimately, okay, so ultimately, even if it was 4 and we're bringing it to 3.5, we're talking about, maybe between, again, 10 feet to 6 to 10 feet. So we're talking about a half a story. Your typical story, again, somewhere in the 10, 12 range. So we're talking somewhere in there, 6 to 10 feet that you're lowering altogether. Again, that 4th story, if it's 4th story, you have that setback, whereas with a 3.5, well, a 3.5 as it's written today doesn't have to be set back, though I believe that applicant was terracing some of it. But that doesn't mean, if you went to 3.5 here, you could certainly say that the 3rd story or the half story needs to be set back some. That does make it a bit of a challenge too. They were creative here with their setback on the gable looking forward. But what you would, from a standard architect, if you are at your 4 stories or your 3 stories, if you're leaving at a whole number, a lot of times you're kind of incentivizing that flat roof, which might not be a bad thing for some areas. But saying that you have an opportunity for that half story may create more gable, perhaps. Not necessarily, but perhaps.
Gotcha.
Okay, this is a 4-story building, right? So if you went to 3.5, it would probably be like right here in that area, correct?
Yeah.
Correct. What I was thinking about the commercial space or the recreational space for people had up there is having like a little, I don't want to say clubhouse, but I mean a little like a closed area. It could be a bar, and then have seating, just on one side, just like have a little, just an enclosed space so if people are up there, they can come in out of the rain or whatever it is. But that's what I was thinking, and I don't know if that's.
But very likely, if you think about just any restaurant bar, we're talking about you're not going into an attic. You're going into a full space. So that's a 4th floor, whether you call it a bar or.
So that would be a 4th floor, just like this, set back.
Exactly right.
Okay, but that.
Whether it's taking up the entirety of the 4th floor or not, because I get what you're saying. Maybe it's just one of those gables that's there, and everything else is a flat roof.
A flat roof with not this part, just like a little, like you see them down in the islands or something, like a little bar there that's just like a
little
area tiki bar. I'm not saying tiki, but you see what I mean.
I
A
know what you
little
mean.
bar you pull up, and the rest of it's space for the people who live there. And it doesn't have to be commercial. This would be just what the amenity of the building is. And they have a space up there and some grills or something and that kind of stuff. I don't know if grills are gonna be allowed on the top of the building, but that's what I was thinking on 3.5, so.
But I think at 3, you actually get more of an opportunity for that, because the whole roof could be, like the greenery, have you
Yeah.
been to the greenery?
No, I haven't.
It's like the whole top of the roof is a roof deck, it's amazing.
No, okay, and that's a 3-story.
No,
That's a
it's
4.
4 stories with a roof deck, right?
Yeah,
It's 4 stories
that's right
with,
there. 4
like
stories.
the top of it, that whole
Just the
top,
greenery, okay.
see
Yeah.
where this is?
Yeah,
That whole roof
yeah.
is all, like,
Beautiful
think they
views
have
of the
fake,
harbor.
I think they have fake grass, right?
Might.
I think it's fake
But
grass.
that's the
and
one
they-
right in the corner of, by the hospital?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah,
they can
that's
look over
nice.
the ocean from
Oh,
there,
yeah,
and that's,
beautiful.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you know,
So that's 3 stories.
That's
No,
4
that's
stories.
four.
Of course, so we're saying we only want 3, but how are we gonna get the amenity on the top?
we're just gonna ask preference, I mean,
We're not gonna call it a story or a half story, we're just gonna call it,
Well, so if you're just leaving it, the activation of the rooftop
Yeah.
is somewhat irrelevant. We're talking about structures.
Yeah.
So if you have a 4-story with a flat roof, or a 3-story with a flat roof, it's all the same.
yeah.
If you're talking about adding a structure on that roof to create a, say, commercial, let's just say a bar, then you're adding another structure, another floor, very likely. So you would have to have, so if they came in and said, we wanna add another structure, and let's just say it's not a regulatory agreement, let's say they got 4 stories by right, and they wanted to add another little, even if it's only a quarter of that roof, and they wanna add an indoor space, and it's 10 feet in height, because you want ample space, that's another floor, and we would say no, it's 4 stories, that's your.
Okay, so, okay, I still wanna hear more about the 3 stories versus this.
So what I'm responding to with respect to the 4 stories is what I've heard from residents who don't like the idea of a 4-story building going flat up with absolutely no architectural interest. And I can imagine that it would be this tunnel-like effect if all of the buildings were 4 stories high. So that's what I'm responding to. So if we were to lower that to 3 stories and provide an incentive to the developer to give them the 4th story if there's a 20-foot setback from the front of the building, that would not create that tunnel effect, because then it would be set back, right? And maybe they would only be able to put a structure on the 4th story that covers only half the roof. I'm just making that up because I don't really know exactly. Which would accomplish what you're looking at, right? Which is some amenity up there. Maybe it's a small restaurant with an outdoor dining area or an outdoor seating area for residents, something like that. If you require a setback from the front of the building and you build the 4th story tall in the back, is that as much of an issue as it would be if it would be an issue for me if it's in the front. I can't accept that.
Well, it's not a 20-foot setback, it's 8 feet, right?
But
So
I'm suggesting that we would
Yeah.
change the setback
yeah.
to be bigger as an incentive to allow them to use the 4th story, create a larger setback so that the structure that's up there is sort of out of view from people on the street.
I'm just wondering though, architecturally, I mean, Seth might be able to speak to this too, is like, when you have a whole separate business on the top of a building, you're gonna have to have an elevator that takes up living space. You're gonna have to have security that, I just don't know, no offense, currently I don't see businesses doing that. I mean, the restaurant business is as hard as it gets right now, so I think like I would love to see that, I just don't think that that's realistic, but I would rather the space be used for residents than trying to put an actual restaurant or a bar up there, because we have a very short season here. But you know what, on a nice day like today, you could have gone outside and brought your chair up there and read a book for an hour.
Okay,
So-
I can agree with that.
You know?
And
I don't
so
disagree.
how do we,
I don't disagree with that. yeah.
okay, so we go 3 and encourage outdoor space above that. And have a setback.
The setback is always there. I mean, even if you're going off of the assumption that, well, one, developers are worried that because of all the backlog in development, that there's gonna be a glut of housing supply. And if you do buy into that idea, then it wouldn't make sense to worry about this wall and canyon of 4-story rectangular buildings on Main Street. Because then each developer would be in competition with each other for a scarce supply of tenants. So they, in their own economic interest, would not want to do something like that.
A 4-story or a what?
Just like a multiple, like the same 4-story Lego block after block after block after block. That's just not it's not reasonable in their own interest to do so. I'm still gonna push for 4 stories because it's just more housing for people. And yes, a rooftop bar would be nice, and that's more of a plumbing issue because you want your water to fall down in the same areas of any kind of building. Food's a lot more complicated than
Yeah,
that.
no,
Sure,
it
no
is. It's
question.
expensive to put a restaurant on the 4th floor, I would think.
But if you do want that rooftop access, I don't see why you would not want at all a 3.5-story building that could have limited access on the roof. If not, you have use of the entire roof, which is why if you want that entire use of the roof, then push it to 4 stories.
Let me ask you, Jim, in your professional opinion, like going to the 3 with the half story like we have here, if we remove the redactions there, is that gonna have the effect of bringing the heights down? Because I think that's, a major concern. And then at the aside benefit, if you would be also to bring down the number of units probably, or what do you think the actual
So going
outcome
from
would
4 to
be?
3.5?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 3.5,
By going to what we have here, we're saying a maximum of 3, however, a half story if the upstairs was activated. Would that
Right.
have the impacts, I think, what we're intending?
so you would lower the overall height, meaning the height of the roof, by 6 to 10 feet or so. You would not lower the height from, say, if you're standing on Main Street, because you're still allowing the 3 stories. There currently is 3 with the setback. And so, but you would likely, I couldn't say for certain, but you would likely maybe slightly reduce the density some, because again, you're losing some space. But, so yeah, so it would be some, probably 10 or less in terms of overall height. And,
I think the other option we talked about, I think John had suggested it, maybe Charlie too, and it sounded like it might be complicated, but if we were to go with the 3 up to half, but ask for the half to have a setback, similar to what they have now, where the 4th floor has to have a setback, I think you said that would be kind of difficult to implement for the builder, or what would?
a half-story setback would be somewhat difficult, but that's, again, that's something that we're interested in, creating a little bit of nuance. I mean, this is that example. Essentially, if it was lowered just ever so slightly, those gables are pushed back 8 feet. And so, but if you see it there, I mean, you're creating basically, well, here, we're basically creating 3 roof lines. We're creating 3 roofs for the builder to build. And that just adds cost and all that. And so a lot of architects and developers are gonna steer away from this because you're creating 2 gable roofs and then a 3rd one that goes this way. Whereas if the simple thing would be, they could have easily done 4 stories, flat roof all the way at the ridge line there, and that would have been much cheaper and easier. But using the design guidelines and working with the commission, they ultimately came up with this, which we don't. Not every applicant will do that.
Jim, at 3.5 stories with a setback,
Yep.
these 2 gables are the issue, but this roof line here, that could just be carried across here and they would get rid of this height here. If they wanted to make this 3.5 stories, is this a flat roof here? And
It connects to 2.
I thought that was the roof line. Okay.
And so you're probably losing that middle area, right? And you're creating.
They would have to cut these off and somehow.
Right. Very likely what you're gonna see there is that 4th story, it gets wiped away and you're gonna be replaced by dormers. So you'll have 8 dormers going across.
Could we, in terms of like a density bonus, could we do the 3 with the additional half story if they provided, 1 additional unit or something in affordable, something like that? Could we include that in this ordinance or recommendation?
Well, you certainly could create, adding additional height for additional affordable percentage. Absolutely, that could be a
To
recommendation.
me, I can live with the half story, go to 3.5 if we're getting something out of it. I mean, the real need is the affordable housing, I'd say that was where I would take issue, Seth, when you say encourage as much housing. I mean, we even have Lisa McNaughton, the housing director, saying we don't have a housing shortage, a shortage of units, it's the way they're being used. If we could somehow direct what's being built to have a higher percentage of affordable, which is what I think we're all trying to work towards, I could be more comfortable with the 3 with a half story if we said they've got to build a higher percentage of affordable units.
What about the idea of doing, sort of building on that idea, and just, 3.5, if you meet certain incentive parameters, which will be decided at the time that Jim talks to him?
Jim is in control.
Prefer it more prescribed than that.
Could we, and again, I think this is our last formal meeting, we could still, I anticipate I'll obviously send another version of this for everybody's final approval, I guess, but, could we work on maybe some language? Could people get behind that idea, staying with the 3? What we would have here, where I have the red line, however, is recommended allowing 3.5, where we had that, but we included something in there, Jim, that, kind of a density and I'm not sure if density is the right word, a height bonus, if there was a higher percentage of affordable units. I'm not sure exactly the way, and maybe Kate has some thoughts on that as well.
What's the economic incentive for the developer to put a half story on it and then be required to have another unit? Take,
Honestly, if the intent is to add additional affordability, I think there's a combination here where rather than the half story, because you're not gonna get a lot of economic gain out of that for the developer.
Yeah.
If you did increase the affordability with the 4-story, but the 4-story is set back greater than the 8 feet that is described here, I think you might get buy-in for that economic gain for a developer to say, yeah, I'll throw in some affordables if I can get a little bit more density, essentially is what it equates to. Whereas the half stories might not get you there.
And I assume that but that wouldn't include I assume the 4th story would be the most expensive unit,
Right.
because obviously it's got better views and this kind of, but what about the fact that if it's a residential unit, would they want the rest of the building, would it be sellable if the rest of the building had amenities like, green space up there? You see, it sort of makes that like the person who's gonna spend that money thinks it's like his space, versus, and how would that work together?
Well, it could be designed such that the green space or the outdoor space for those units that would be on the 4th floor could be separate from the sort of you could divide it up.
We wanna make the green space for everybody in the building.
Right.
Yeah,
But if you're the one that's gonna be
yeah.
owning or renting that unit on the top,
Yeah.
the developer could ask for more money for that top space because first of all, you're probably gonna have a fabulous view.
Yeah,
But they could have their own, it could be built such that space is private for them. They could make more money off
I'm
that,
sure they could,
for sure.
yeah.
But then they could have the rest of the rooftop could be for the rest of the residents, not necessarily private.
Right.
I'm just making it up as we go, I don't really know.
And that's a
Who knows
business
what's
and
gonna
design,
happen.
well, that's a business decision for the
Yeah,
developer, and then
right.
also a design question
Right.
for the architect underneath them.
Right.
Okay, so where do we stand?
I guess, personally, I am very reticent to go to the 4 stories.
Wait, is it economical, is it aesthetic, what's,
A combination.
okay.
Yeah, it's partially because of the concerns, the visual, the outcome could be, overbuilding glut of units, and, input we've heard from the community as to what they want Main Street to look like. It's a combination of all those.
Well, I can tell you that saying 3.5 will get the developer talking just like this table's been talking. What the hell do we do with the half story? How do we do that? Is it worth it to us? Is there anything else we can do? So I guess I'm leaning more now to, let's just put it down at 3.5 and see what the hell happens. And, it'll be set back. It provides some additional space potentially. And if something's gonna be 40 feet, it doesn't matter anyway, so. I don't know if that's logical,
Does anybody
but-
wanna make so if you look at page 13, right now, there is the wording that's redlined. This, as it reads now with the redactions, it would just make it a maximum of 3 stories. If we reinsert the red line, it would go back to our original thought, which would be to have a maximum of 3 stories. However, it is recommended to allow a 3.5 story, and maybe we can make sure this is right, Jim. The rooftop is proposed as active space for rooftop amenities for the residents. So we know that can be 3.5, he showed us, and it would be the rooftop of that portion, the half story, that would be, we're not saying the half story is gonna be used for amenities, it would be the rooftop above the half story, right?
Yeah.
Well,
No.
you're not gonna have
No.
amenities on a half story because
Oh.
you're hanging out on a gable roof at that point.
Okay.
Okay.
On the edge.
Could be fun, but.
All right.
Cool.
But so if we're talking a half story, so 3.5 stories, we're probably eliminating the discussion about the incentivizing active space. So you could easily put it as a maximum of 3.5 stories, and then on the bottom here where it reads where it says the 4th story of the building must be recessed, you could replace that with the 3.5 story or the
Okay.
yeah, however you want to
Yeah,
say
the
it.
point
Yeah,
half
Yeah,
story.
Okay.
must be recessed, perhaps.
Okay.
If that's what you're interested in.
And I think
Does that sound
maybe
reasonable?
we delete the commercial space, such as a restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
That's not gonna
That's
work.
just not gonna happen.
I thought
And
that-
with the 3.5 story, if a developer wanted to put outside space, he could do that.
Absolutely.
But there would really be no financial incentive
No,
to
but
do that.
other than what we're just talking about, like the greenery, that's a selling point probably,
Yeah,
right?
that would be the selling
Yeah,
point.
a selling point, same with the cascade perhaps.
All right, so we can wordsmith that, Jim. And then on the setback then, we currently have 8 feet. Do we want to make a change to that?
I think the thing is that, again, if you keep setting back and setting back, you're losing the livable
Yeah.
space to Seth's point.
Yeah.
You know, like, we're already losing it because we're making it a half story, and then if you set it back more, you're losing even more space. So I think if you're gonna set it too far back, you should just get rid of it
So
and
we'll
make it
leave
3
it
stories.
at, we'll leave it at 8?
Leave it at
Yeah.
8,
Yeah,
yeah.
it says at least 8, so
Okay.
someone just said, hey, I wanna do
Okay.
something else, that's fine.
All right, so we're gonna say a maximum height of 3.5, and then we're gonna have the setback of that, okay. All right. Okay. Let's see, then,
I'm there.
okay.
It was, I don't know if that's a.
Charlie,
solution,
do we
but
have,
it's a
let's
resolution.
go around quickly, let's take a quick vote, Seth,
No.
okay?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Kathy, Charlie? Support that,
Aye.
we're sticking with the 3.5?
I don't know now.
You abstain?
You know, I mean, I'm concerned that the half will be something that builders will, you know, it'll be a nuisance to them.
Yes.
And
3 stories and the problem will be solved.
you know, if there could be residential somehow, is it possible to get residential in a half
It will
story?
It will be,
Yeah, it will be
be.
residential,
It
that's
could
what it's
be.
gonna be.
It can be, yeah.
It's not commercial, it's residential.
I think we're
All right.
basically formalizing, I think, what we had originally, which was the up to 3.5.
Of residential
Yeah.
space, it's not commercial.
But Jim, you said with the heights, it'd only be a.
Yeah,
the-
you're not gonna have a single unit in that half story. It's likely the second bedroom of the 3rd story or something like that with a staircase that goes
Oh, I
up,
see.
you know, something
Yeah,
like
okay.
that.
Like lofty?
Yeah, it could be loft,
Yeah.
yeah, space. So yeah, it wouldn't be. It can be habitable per the zoning. It can be habitable
It's
space.
the habitable space, Charlie.
Okay, I can go with that.
And then I would vote for that, so we've
Yeah.
got 6, I think, a majority of them, okay. Okay, so we'll work on that for you. I think page 23, Jim had a recommendation for an amendment he had mentioned, and we discussed it briefly at, maybe it's not page 23. I think
Not much there on
yeah,
page
it's not
23.
there. Let's see, what page is that?
21 maybe?
21, yes, I apologize.
Okay.
You'll see the solar installation regulations. The redlined last phrase was recommended by Jim, and I'll let Jim explain that.
Yeah, just when we were adopting the solar ordinance a few years back, I believe we cut short a portion of the impacts that could potentially be created. And so my suggestion here is just to kind of holistically give a holistic approach to what those impacts could be, and again, recognizing that solar is partially protected through the Dover Amendment, not trying to increase those bounds too far, but just reiterating it really through the public health, safety, welfare. So just expanding on to contain noise and adding to simply limit glare and reduce all other impacts to abutting properties to protect the public health, safety, and welfare.
Take a quick poll.
And Jim, I just have a question. The minimum setback of 150 feet, that's determined by the state? Could we make that setback larger?
No, that is a local requirement that we inserted. There's no requirements from the state for setbacks.
Okay.
In a residential district, it was actually 10 feet, and so the planning board adopted 150 feet based on public feedback.
Okay, and do we wanna, okay, so the only thing we really can have input on here is the dimensional requirements. Cause if we wanted to change anything else in the solar, the ground mounted solar photovoltaic overlay district, we would need to go back to that whole,
Yeah, I would think that would be more of a comprehensive discussion. We would
that's
need
my
to-
next ad hoc.
Sounds good.
I was hoping to get rid of some of these headlines.
Not
So-
if you live next to that solar farm, you would
Oh, I'd
want
be
that
there
ad
all
hoc.
day long, yeah.
So a quick poll, I mean, all in favor of that amendment from, okay,
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
fine.
Charlie,
Abstaining.
okay.
Yeah.
are
Okay,
you okay with adding that?
With the solar regulation?
yes,
Yeah, I'm good.
okay. We are running out of time, given the other meeting that we're backing up to here.
Are they also meeting in this room?
They're meeting in the next room, but I guess they need the video,
Same
so we lose our
communications, yeah.
video, so we have to have it available.
Do we know if that's still on or not?
Oh,
I can check.
can we find out? Yeah, thank you.
Excuse me if I could, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Did you want me to address my two edits to the
Yeah.
memo?
Definitely, yeah, I wanted to get that, I'm sorry, Kate.
Okay,
Let's let Jim get back in the room real quick here.
sure.
Why don't you go ahead and get started, actually.
Say her.
Yeah,
it's fine.
All right, it's just two things. The first one is on page 19, or actually, I guess it's page 20. The section starts on page 19. It's the zoning enforcement. I just added not even a complete sentence, but in the paragraph on page 20 that starts, although zoning enforcement was one of several key topics specifically identified. Is everybody with me?
Page 19,
Page 19, sorry.
okay, I get it, yeah.
I believe it's page 20, at least on the version I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think we
okay,
might
it's
have
19
different
on
versions
the
here, but
notice.
go ahead.
Oh,
I got it.
okay, it's the sections entitled
There should be some waivers.
zoning,
We know where you are,
They
Kate.
think it
We know
is.
where you are. It's in blue on our.
okay,
Yeah.
zoning enforcement issues immediate action, and then it goes on to the next page. The paragraph that starts, although zoning enforcement was one of several key topics specifically identified for discussion by the committee.
Yes.
The language I added, so if you keep going, I didn't take anything out, it's just added after where it says, we were subsequently informed by the town's legal department that zoning enforcement was not specifically included in the wording of the committee's charge. I added, and that zoning enforcement is not within the purview of the town council, but rather is overseen by the town manager.
So there's just the word it, it should be is instead of it. After the word zoning enforcement.
Is, you're right, it should
Should be
be
is,
is.
yeah, yeah, that's just a really
And
minor.
I didn't add to the language of this memo, but I do recall that I said at one of the previous meetings when I was explaining that you could certainly make recommendations for zoning changes. And that zoning and zoning enforcement are related, but zoning enforcement is under the town manager. It's done through the building commissioner. But that doesn't mean you can't make, and you have, and through this memo, there are recommendations for other types of changes to the zoning ordinance itself that might have an impact on enforcement. And that leads to the second comment that I made, and I only made this other comment because there was a section, well, let me identify where it is before I tell you so page 21, which is really just the next page, the title is, it's F, rental properties.
Page 20 on our version.
Yeah, the version, okay, yep.
The only reason that I made an amendment, or not an amendment, but I added some language to this is because the previous version that I was given said, Attorney Connolly provided information, and that's all it said, and that just struck me as, it needs context. Why did I provide information? What was the purpose? And so I added, member/Councilor Crow had asked about the Spenlenhauer case, you might all remember, in Osterville, which was a parking situation. So I actually went to the court, got the case, saw what happened, and I came back and I explained it to the committee. And I didn't add links to this. Bob had asked if I could attach links, but it's only a Superior Court case, so it isn't anything reportable. You can probably find the Superior Court decision online, but I didn't think I needed to do that much, like adding links to the case, because it was never appealed. It was, I'm sorry, I think it was appealed, but it's not something that you're going to find online, and it's not a conclusive solution to what we might want to do with respect to recommendations on parking. So I left the whole rest of the section. It does say at the end, we recommend that the council review and consider amendment of the current, and again, it says rental parking restrictions, but the case that I reported on, I don't believe Spenlenhauer was a rental property in Osterville. I believe it was the property owner's property.
That's correct, yeah.
But he lost, the town lost that enforcement case because the court decided, and you may recall that I said this at one of the meetings, it was a Board of Health regulation. It was not in zoning. And as a Board of Health regulation, it did not have a nexus to public health. And you can't have a Board of Health regulation that has nothing to do with public health. They might have intended, when the Board of Health was adopting it, to have it relate to septic systems, a number of bedrooms or something like that, and therefore a number of cars, but there wasn't a direct enough connection. So the court overturned that particular section. And the other thing the court said was, because Barnstable has parking in many sections of its zoning ordinance, that it should be in the zoning ordinance. And then the committee asked me to provide copies of all the sections of the ordinance, the zoning ordinance, that discuss parking. So I did that, chapter 59 and some other things. So the language, getting back to this paragraph under rental properties, the language that I added was where it says the committee, this was already in there, the committee discussed residential parking, the residential parking topic, and then I added, and a member inquired. This is where I deleted Attorney Connolly provided information. I wanted to be more specific of what I was asked and what I provided. A member inquired about a court case involving multiple vehicles parked outside on a residential property that was not necessarily a rental property. Upon request, Attorney Connolly reviewed the case, reported back to the committee that the court in that case invalidated the ordinance provision because it was a health regulation of parking that had no nexus to public health and should have been contained in the zoning ordinance. Also, at the request of a member, Attorney Connolly provided the committee with copies of all parking provisions currently contained in the zoning ordinance. Oh, and there should be a period there. And then it's the sentence that was already there in the conclusion, which is we recommend the council review and consider amendment of the current rental parking restrictions. So that's my proposed amendment. I'm fine with any changes to the language of it as long as the content.
Yeah, and Kate, well, I know your email, I didn't get a chance, we didn't get it, I think, printed by Cynthia beforehand, so we don't have that in front of us, but I will take a look at that. But as you've read it, I have no problems. I don't know if anybody wants to make a motion to accept that. I can review it if we need to fine tune it, but motion to accept.
I make a motion that we fine tune it and, include it in the, I'm afraid there's gonna be another draft.
Yeah.
So, question I had, what if we merely make reference to the home occupation within the zoning ordinance? It's something saying complying with the home occupations in residential districts. Does that legitimize this in a better way? I mean, and sort of solve a couple problems?
Well, this is rental parking restrictions, not commercial in residential areas.
Well,
It's,
Pause for 1 second. Kate, I know we're backing up to the next meeting here. We sunset on the 31st. Hopes were to have this done far enough today. Can we have, through Cynthia, fine tuning of the final letter over the next couple of days, that is acceptable? Or at this point, we're not having any, we wouldn't have another formal meeting of the committee without asking for another extension? Any thoughts on that?
We want to avoid the appearance of an open meeting law violation, so we can't have serial communications. But if there are minor comments that people want to give to Cindy, you can give them directly to her.
Okay.
You can't then have her call somebody back and say so-and-so made this comment and that sort of thing. And to Councilor Turkison's point, that was the other thing I pointed out, is that this section that said that I had provided information was under rental properties. I'm not sure that's the right place for it, because the Spendlin-Howard House was not a rental property, so it might be that should actually go in a different section, and I'm happy to look through it and figure out where it would be better included and provide that information to Cynthia.
Let me ask the
I'm
group.
okay with that. I'm okay with what she just
She
proposed.
said, is that something we can accomplish without having, I know they're gonna probably shut off the video here shortly. Is that something we can accomplish without having to have an extension of the committee and another public meeting?
If you take a vote now and then just let Cindy deal with the language, and I can work with her to confirm that it's accurate, but
Okay.
somebody just said that they wanted to fine tune the language that I had already provided, so I don't know how that would be fine tuned.
Well, no, you had said if you had any questions about the wording, but no, I'm not changing it or whatever, just the word goes inserting is what I was referring to into the memo.
If I could, Kate, would it be appropriate if anyone who had comments or suggested changes to the memo could send them to Cindy? Cindy collects them and provides them to the chair, who will finalize the memo for submission?
We could do that, but we can't, since we're about to miss our deadline, unless, no, and there's not even time to schedule a meeting by the 31st, really.
Yeah, well, we have President Tamish said he didn't expect the memo on the 31st. We understood that we would have some time to put it together and stuff, so I think we can still, communicate, as Jim suggested, to finalize.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's fine. Send comments to Cindy, and as long as they're not substantive changes to what you've all voted on,
Okay.
that's fine.
And also, Attorney Connolly, the following meeting on housing, the subcommittee, will probably have to go at another meeting also.
I'm sorry, it will have to what?
We'll probably end up having one more meeting other than today.
Yeah, we'll have to ask the chair, we'll have to ask the president of the town council on April 1st if he is willing to extend the housing committee for another meeting. Yeah.
So I guess the question is, are we as a committee going to look at this again, make any comments to Cindy, and then allow you to pull this all together and finalize it without meeting one more time? Is that really what we're suggesting?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
I think, in my opinion, I think we're pretty much there. It's just sort of minor edits, words missing, a few places wrong words, I think we're pretty much there. I don't know what you all think.
I agree.
Well, I think we need to make a motion to allow members to make edits, to go through Cindy, and to allow Chair Schulte to make any edits to this current document that he sees fit and finalize it.
Second.
There has to be a roll call because Charlie's on Zoom.
Okay.
Committee members. Councilor Crowe,
Yes.
Councilor Turkelson,
Come back to me, thanks.
Ken Alsman,
Yes.
Seth Etienne,
Yes.
Catherine Ledeck,
Yes.
Counselor Bloom,
Yes.
Chair of Committee Bob Schulte.
Yes.
Yes.
It passes.
And I will ask you if you could, over the weekend, send those to Cynthia. Cynthia, if you happen to see them and can forward them to me, I hate to ask you over the weekend, Monday.
I work 7 days a week anyway, doesn't matter.
Jim, I will follow up with you on the wording on the building heights. I will review that. I'll finish the memo, and Kate, then I will send a finished memo to Cynthia to distribute to the committee for a final checkoff on that.
Well, the committee can't take any further votes on it,
Okay.
but if
Okay.
you want to have somebody look at, misspellings and
Okay.
mispunctuation, that's fine.
Okay, all right, well,
But you can't have any more communications about it other than talking to Cindy.
okay. And before we do that, I should have asked, was everybody comfortable with the priority assignments that I put in there based on, where the discussions we had?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any concerns, okay?
Yeah, seems okay.
Okay.
I'd like to make,
I think we can highlight them a little bit differently. I don't know, they just seem to pop out too much for me, but that's
Okay.
just a
Okay.
silly thing.
What's that?
I make a motion to approve the minutes of February 21st and
Okay.
March 14th as written.
Seconded? Second.
Sorry.
You need to call roll
Roll
call?
call. Counselor Bloom,
Yes.
Counselor Crowe,
Yes.
Counselor Turkelson,
Yes.
Ken Osmond,
Yes,
Seth Etienne,
Abstain.
abstained, Catherine Ledeck,
Yes.
Chair of Committee Bob Schulte.
Yes.
They pass.
And I apologize, because I really had wanted to have some comments, final comments, but I just want to thank everybody on the committee, particularly all the staff, Jim, Kate, Cynthia, Sarah and her staff. Everybody's done a tremendous job. Appreciate it very much. And particularly want to thank the public, members of the public who came before us publicly, speaking, written, talked to the committee members. So it's been a pleasure being the chair. I want to thank everybody for their efforts.
And to thank Chair Schulte.
Thank you. Great job. Look forward to wrapping things up and getting this member to the council. So again, would appreciate any comments you have, send them to Cynthia. I'll be looking for them over the weekend, and Monday we'll get this thing pulled together.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Committee members, Counselor Turkelson,
Yes.
Counselor Crowe,
Yes.
Ken Osmond,
yes.
Counselor Bloom,
Yes.
Catherine Ledeck,
Yes.
Seth Etienne,
Yes.
and I think I got everybody, right? You are adjourned.
Thank
Oh,
you.
Bob Schulte, I'm sorry.